Hi everyone, my name is Eduardo. I live in Paris. I'm a front-end developer and also a member of the Vue.js core team. I'm the author of its router and also a small library called Pinia, which is an alternative to Vuex, a store library as well, that I'm going to talk about today. And what I want to talk to you about is not only Pinia, but what is beyond state management, what matters in state management more than the state itself. But first, before even diving into Pinia or anything else, what is state management? It's just having a global object that you change with a few functions, just like that. Global state, you have the user, then you have a function login that allows you to change the state. Is this state management? Some people will tell you that it is, and to be honest, it pretty much is, especially if you just add a reactive function call around that object. Well, you have a completely valid global state solution working for your Vue 3 or Vue 2 application. And this is still state management. And some people will tell you, but state management is something you have and you create when you have bigger apps or medium to big apps, or when you know your application is going to grow and is going to need that complexity in the future. But this is pretty much a lie. You don't need to have a complex application to need or consider using a state management solution or a store. That what defines if you should or not use a state management solution is how the store is used inside of your application. For example, is your state used in many different places in pages, or does your state outlives pages? Do you need your state when you go from one page to another? Maybe your application only has 3 pages, but you require that state to outlives all the pages. And in that scenario, you need a state management. And then the next question that comes to my mind is, should I stop having that bare bones reactive global state management solution, or should I use a store? And the truth is, there is a very small step to use a store. You just need using define store with Pinia or Vuex 5, and you can pretty much keep the same things that you were having. The state is going to be in a vertical state. Then you're going to have the global state variable is going to become these. So these.user equals something. So the change is very simple. And the cost in terms of size is also very small. It's like 1.5 kilobytes for Pinia. But of course, it comes with many other things, right? So do you really need a store? What makes you change your mind? What makes you go from, okay, I'm going to stop using my bare bones solution and start using a store? And there are a few reasons that will make you go that direction. The main reason is server-side rendering is definitely so much easier to handle with a store like Pinia or Vuex. But there are many more. So you also have state outliving components. This is pretty much, it comes out of the box for the state management solutions as well, but depending on how and where you want to instantiate the global state, is not something that always comes in. And then you have the centralized state shared by many components. So if you create one single global state, that's not going to scale forever. If you keep adding things, new functions, new properties to your state, at some point that state and that file is going to get bigger. You can split in multiple files as well, but you're going to make your object grow in complexity way too much. And that's going to create other problems if you watch the state or do any other complicated stuff. Then you also have the better developer experience. So if you are using a global object, you cannot inspect, change that state within devtools somewhere. You have to do it manually through the component inspector. You cannot, you don't have anything in the timeline. You don't know where the changes to the state, comes from. So if you want to keep your state while you are changing the store or your state management solution, it's going to reload the page by default. You will have to handle hot mode replacement yourself. Then if you want to test or unit test your components, you are going to need to mock your state management solution or test it twice. So have tests for your state management, and also tests that rely on the behavior, the current behavior of the store in the component. And then if you want to handle local storage or undo, redo, or any other functionality that is more generic and that applies to any store, any state management solution, you're going to have to implement that by yourself. Whereas if you have a store, all these things come out of the box. You don't need to do anything. So this is why I want to talk to you a bit about how do we achieve these things and what are these things that exist when you use something, a store like Pinia, and make you consider using one. So first of all, what is Pinia? If you take this main.js file, .ts file that you have in your project, you will see that you have this app, create app. And to add Pinia, you only need to import these create Pinia from Pinia, and then create what we call a Pinia and use it. And this, it's a very important part of using Pinia, because that object that you have is the registry of all the store, the centralized state. That means that when you create the Pinia, there is a state property on that object that is pretty much an empty reactive object. And later on, whenever you call use store for the first time, that store is going to be created and its state is going to get added dynamically to that empty object that we created. And the same happens with any other store that we call after that, okay? So that Pinia state is going to grow as the application, as the user keeps using the application as you need. And having this centralized state has been a core concept since Pinia at the very beginning, which was about 2 years ago already. And that was even 1 month before Vue 3 even got released for the first time. So it means that when Pinia existed, the first time first version of Pinia was only compatible with Vue 2 because there was no Vue 3 or whatever. And at that time, things were very different from now. I was calling internal functions of the DevTools, V5. So that was pretty much just hacking around the non-public API of the DevTools. So I could display limitations and the state in the DevTools where Vuex was supposed to display its information. I will have to duplicate getters and actions every time you call use store. So that will create a larger memory footprint and also worse performance when it comes to computer properties. There was no extensibility whatsoever. There was no plugin interface at all. And there was only an option-based API. Today, with Pinia Vue 2, we have support for Vue 2 and Vue 3. We have two different syntax we can use. We have the option API and we have the setup syntax, which we're going to see later. And we have a very advanced DevTools support for the version 6. So we have a timeline. We can inspect per component. We can inspect all the stores. We can modify them. We have hot module replacement with a very simple one-liner for your stores. We have a testing module that allows you to pretty much create a testing Pinia that mocks any store that is used by your components without you having to change anything in your components. You have a Nux module that works for Nux 2 and Nux 3, and you have type-safe extensibility with plugins, which I won't dive into, but basically you can add any option to your stores and then add properties to the store, and they can be typed safely, and you can use the ID of the store, the state of the store, the actions, anything you want. It's pretty powerful. And another thing about Pinia, at this state, that is important to mention is that the core API, the way you define stores, is the same as Vuex5. So Vuex5 came after Pinia, and it has influenced a lot the process and the API of Vuex5. And I keep a very close eye because I participated a lot in this discussion. So I make sure that anything that gets added to Vuex5, it's added to Pinia in a way that it's very easy in the future to change from one to the other, especially for the core of it. And the main changes of Vuex5 and Pinia compared to Vuex4, and the thing that most people will notice, is that we no longer have mutations. Overall, we have a much less verbose version of the stores. The mutations completely disappear. So you have instead the state, and then you can mutate the state directly on the store. But that's not the only way, at least for Pinia, to modify the state. We can also use a function patch that allows us to pass a partial object, a patch object that we apply to the store. And we can also pass a function so we can modify the state directly. This is useful when we are interacting with collections like sets, maps, or arrays. Then we have the one-liner hold module replacement, as I was saying before, and which is pretty much just a line you copy every time on the stores, and you forget about it. And then you have the plugins. So the plugins in Pinia, I try to make them, to give them as much power as possible. As a matter of fact, the DevTools, the plugin, the DevTools implementation for Pinia is a Pinia plugin. And you can do many things. The plugins for Pinia are just functions, and they receive the application, the Pinia instance, the store, and its options, the options with which the store was defined. And usually you do three different possible things. You can either call a subscribe function that is going to trigger every time you mutate the state of your store, but it also accounts for patches. So if you do a patch with a function or with an object, it's only going to trigger one, differently from a watch. Then we have an action, which triggers before an action executes and allows you to control the outcome, and if there is an error or if it succeeds, you can do all the things. And then the most simple but yet so powerful functionality is to return an object on the plugins. And these objects that you return in the plugins are going to get merged into the store. So this allows you to override or add new properties to every single store. You can also filter by ID if you want. You can also read from the options. You can do many things. And this is a very simple example, is that you can just add the router to every single store. And then in the actions, you can just call these.router, and that's it. You get the router, you can push, you can replace, you can check the current route if you want. But one of my favorite ones is the onAction. The onAction looks very simple, and it is very simple for a lot of cases, but it's very powerful. So this is what is used by the DevTools behind the scenes to display the timeline, which we're going to see just in a moment. But for example, this is the code you need to send errors from your actions to a reporting service like Sentry or anything. So you just call an action, and then on error, you get the error and you set the errors with the name of the action that failed. You can also send the store ID, which I forgot to put there, and then the arguments that were passed. And I want to show you there is much more like the next plugin and the Pinia testing module that I want to show you, but I want you to give you a taste of using Pinia, what it looks like with all these functionalities. So let me show you. Okay. So I have a server running. All right. So I have a Vite server running here with my application, and I have one page, a very simple page where I have counter demo, and this is just, as you can see. There we go. So we have this up and running. The demo counter, I have a use counter that I'm importing from this file right here, and I'm just using the counter, and I'm directly calling counter.n++, and I'm displaying the whole state of the counter. And so on the demo counter, what I have is just a defined store. I have my initial state here, and I have the hot module replacement snippet of code. And what I want to show you is here I can increment the state, but I can also add new properties. Okay, and if I add a new property, it will appear, it will leave the old state, but it will add itself to to the state of the store. And if we remove it, it's going to disappear from the state as well. So of course, this works with everything else, the getters, the actions. And I want to show you a little bit of the DevTools that we have and how cool it is to work with the store and debug your applications thanks to the DevTools. So here I have an increment. I can increment my state, and if I open the DevTools here, I can inspect the counter, and I can see here that I have my state. I can increment it, I can change it if I want. Okay, and here I have a timeline, and if I go down, I can see that I have Pinia, and if I increment, I can see small dots, yellow dots, and if I select them, there they go, we can see 3 different dots that we have, which are here, and what I'm doing. So here, notation goes from 102 to 103 on the key N, which is the counter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an action here. I'm going to add an action that is going to decrement the decrease until it gets to 0. This is going to be an async action, and I'm going to do while this.n is bigger than 0, and it's going to decrement, and then I'm going to await a small delay of time of 200 milliseconds. So that's it. That is the action. It's very simple. Now what I'm going to do is add a button here. I'm going to call counter.decrease to 0. And we have auto-completion as well. Pretty cool. Oh yeah. Decrease to 0. We'll just change the text a little bit. Alright, so here we're just doing 200 because it's faster than waiting 1 second. And what we want to see is how the changes of n can be inspected one by one in the DevTools. So here, let me just show you the timeline. We're going to clear. I'm going to decrease to 0. And as you can see here, they start appearing. You can see how n start decreasing. And what's interesting, I can also call increment, and they appear right under. And I can also have multiple actions running in parallel, as you can see, until n gets to 0. And then we can inspect the actions and inspect all the mutations by group. So here, if I switch to group, I can see that this action here, we have a total of 74 events, and it took 14 seconds, sorry, to finish. The other ones are a bit shorter, so they have less events and they took less long. And every time you can see the new value and the old value. So that's pretty cool. And what's interesting is we can also go to the state management here, get to the actual state, so we can see all the state. We can change them from there. And we can do that while the action is happening. We can modify that anytime. So here, if I modify the value and I go to 50, you can see that it changed right away here. We don't need to do anything else. And in the timeline, we have the events happening at the same time, and they get logged in. Furthermore, if we want to do, we want to group multiple modifications. Let's say we want to count how many times decreased times, how many times we decreased n. So this means that decrease times increments. So it appears here, we can increment a few times, we decrease to 0. And now if I check the DevTools, I can see that I have more mutations. I have one for changing n here, and one for changing decrease times, which has a type, by the way. Let me see type. There we go. So one thing I can do instead is using the platform component. So we do this as state. Oops. And then here we can do what we want to. And this will group the modification. So here, let's increment a few times and decrement. Now we go check this, and we can see that we have less events. We can inspect and see the old values and the new values, 5 and 0 for n. That was the last one. Okay. The first one, so we have 5 and 4. There we go. And one thing that is very interesting and a lot of people don't know is that inside of state, we can call any composable function that we have. We can call watch, we can call computed, ref, anything we want. So if I want to save the state to the local storage, I can just use the ucore function, use local storage, and I can just replace use local storage counter demo .n, and I can give it an initial value of 0. So I can use that. I'm going to reload the page because I just changed the nature of these state properties, so I need to probably reload the page. We have a 0. If we increment here and I reload the page, we can see that the 8 is the same. It hasn't changed, and everything else works the same. So very simple yet so powerful. You can use any composition API right from here, and anything else works the same, right? It's just the state, so you can still inspect it here, you can still change it, and it will adapt. But all right, so this is the option version of store. And so you have a state, you have the actions, you have the getters as well, and you can add all the properties to the options if you want. For example, you can add the bounce option that allows you to define which actions you want to bounce. But there is another version of the syntax that we can use, and that's the setup syntax. So the setup syntax, I have a different example for that. It's a bit longer. I cannot go through the whole thing. But instead of having an object like we have here, we have a function. This function is the same as the setup function on a component. And you just create the same as in a component, refs, computed, functions. You use your composables the way you want. For example, this is a use cache request, so it's similar to a stale while we validate. It caches the first time, and it still does the request in the background. So a very, very simple one. And then we have a few functions, and we can even do watchers. So that's pretty cool too. Here, for example, if I go to I navigate a few times, I get a few images, and then when I go back, I can see that I get the image right away, and in the background is doing a call of the network anyway. And here you can see that these store appear. We still have the demo counter, which hasn't changed, but as soon as we got into this page, we got access to these new store. As you can see here, we can see how it changes from one day to the other. We can also have the errors, by the way, which I didn't show, but I don't think I have it implemented here to show you. We can see the errors in the timeline also, and we can inspect them right away in the devtools, which is pretty cool. We can log them as well, so we don't even need to add console logs anywhere, because we can do that on demand through the devtools. So you can only focus on adding just debugger or breakpoints once you want to debug that, but you can just console log from the devtools anything you want. Usually have, just to show you, even though here the error is not very important, but here you can log it to the console, and so that gives you access to the actual error, where it comes from. So that's it. That's everything I want to show you for the demo. I want to finish by saying thank you to the sponsors I have on GitHub, sponsors who allow me to work most of the time on open source. So if you like what I do on the router, on the Vuex system, on Pinia, whatever, please consider supporting me, especially if you're a company. And there are nice perks, by the way, in doing that. And I also want to thank you for listening to me. I hope you learned something and that you're going to give Pinia a try soon.